I release you, Philippa, for a lady of better fortune, Edmund Hartwell said, and the whole bright ballroom heard him say it. He did not even lower his voice. He stood beneath the blaze of the chandelier with the new Heiress upon his arm, a Miss Carstone of £40,000, and he let the words fall like a glove flung at Philippa Dunmore's feet, as though a broken engagement were a thing to announce between the quadrille and the supper bell. A hush spread outward from the place where she stood. Fans paused mid-flutter. The Duke of Wycherley, watching from the cold edge of the room where he always watched, saw the precise moment the colour left her face, and saw too that she did not fall. He had esteemed her, quietly, for 2 seasons. He had never said so. A man with his name and his lands did not throw words about. He had learned long ago that the world weighed everything he uttered and bartered it back at interest. So he had only watched her, the steadiness of her, the way she listened to dull old women as though they were worth listening to, the way she had once knelt in a muddied lane to free a sparrow tangled in a dropped bonnet ribbon while finer ladies stepped past. He had told himself it was nothing. He told himself a great many things. Now Hartwell smiled his easy, ruined smile, and the room waited to see Philippa Dunmore weep. She did not weep. She lifted her chin a half-inch, only a half-inch, and said, in a voice that did not shake though it cost her everything not to let it, "Then I wish you joy of your fortunes, sir. You will find it colder company than you suppose." A few of the kinder matrons murmured. The crueler set tittered behind their fans, already composing the story they would carry to 100 drawing-rooms by morning. The Dunmore girl, jilted in the open, thrown over for a richer face, her portion too small, her name now a small sad joke. Alban could see it travelling. He could see the months ahead of her, the careful invitations withdrawn, the seats that would no longer be saved, the slow genteel starvation of a gentlewoman with no protector and a public wound. He set down his glass. It was not a decision so much as the surfacing of one long made. He crossed the floor, and the crowd parted for him as crowds always did. For the Duke of Wycherley was a man other men feared without quite knowing why, too still, too watchful, too little in need of their approval. He stopped before Philippa, and he bowed, and the depth of the bow was itself a kind of speech, for he bowed to her as he would have bowed to a queen. "Miss Dunmore," he said, "I believe the next is mine." There was no next promised to him, they both knew it. She looked up into his dark, unreadable face, and for one instant something flickered there that she had never been permitted to see, not coldness at all, but its careful disguise. She gave him her hand. He led her out, and the orchestra, which had faltered, found its feet again, and the Duke of Wycherley danced with the jilted Miss Dunmore before all the watching world, slowly, gravely, as though she were the only woman in England worth the trouble of his attention. Hartwell's smile curdled, and Miss Carstone of £40,000 looked suddenly less luminous on his arm, for the Duke had not so much as glanced her way. "You need not do this," Philippa said low as they turned. "I am quite ruined, your grace. You will only stain yourself with my disgrace." "I am the Duke of Wycherley," Alban answered, equally low. "I do not take stains. I make them or I wash them away as I please. Tonight I find I please to wash one away." "Why?" she whispered. He was silent a long moment, guiding her through the figure, his hand sure at her waist. "Because I have watched a faithless man throw away the one true thing in this room," he said at last, "and I find I have no patience left for watching." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing and let him hold her up, and the dance went on, and the room understood, slowly, then all at once, that the story they had meant to tell about her had been taken out of their hands. When the music ended, he did not return her to the wall where the jilted are left to stand. He kept her hand upon his arm and walked her the slow length of the room, past Hartwell, past the Heiress, past the whole tittering set, and paused before the cruelest of the matrons, a Lady Vexley, who had already begun the story she meant to carry abroad, and said, with the faint cold smile of a man who has decided to be amused, You will give us joy, I think, Lady Vexley. Miss Dunmore has done me the honour of permitting me to call. It was not yet true, he had not yet asked, but he said it as though it were settled, and the matron's mouth closed upon whatever cruelty it had been shaping. Philippa understood, in that single instant, that he had spent a portion of his own untouchable name to buy her back her footing, and had not even paused to count the cost. He called the next morning, not at the fashionable hour, when callers came to be seen, but early, with his card sent up plainly, and sat in the modest parlour of her aunt's house with his hat upon his knee in a grave courtesy that made the old woman flutter like a girl. Then he asked to speak with Philippa alone, and her aunt, scenting something that might yet save her niece from a slow ruin, withdrew with unseemly haste. "I am not a poetical man," the Duke said, when they were alone. He stood by the window, the morning light hard on the strong planes of his face. "I have not the gift of pretty speech, and I will not insult you by attempting it. So I will say it plainly, and you may refuse me plainly if you choose, and I will trouble you no further." Philippa's hands were very still in her lap. "I have esteemed you," he said, "since the first season I saw you. I told myself it was beneath a man of my station to esteem a portionless gentlewoman, and I told myself a great many other cowardly things, and I let 2 years go by saying them. Last night I watched a fool give you away in a public room, and I understood that I had been a worse fool than he, for he at least had the courage to act, even wrongly, while I had only the cowardice to wait." He turned to her. "I am asking you to be my wife, Miss Dunmore, not to spare you. Not from pity. I have no use for a wife I pity. I am asking because I have wanted no one else, and I am done pretending otherwise." She looked at him, and the careful armour she had worn all the bright cruel night before came apart at last, not in weeping, but in something gentler. "They will say you took me to spite Hartwell," she said, "or out of charity. They will say a great many things." "They will," he agreed. "And I shall not trouble to correct a single one of them, for I have never in my life cared what they say, and I do not intend to begin on the happiest morning of it." He crossed to her then, and went down on one knee, this proud, feared man, on the worn carpet of a shabby parlour, and took her hand. "Say yes, Philippa. Let the world make of it what it will. I should like to spend the rest of my days giving them nothing whatever to talk of but how well we suit." "Yes," she said. The word broke a little. "Yes, though heaven knows you might have done far better." "No," said the Duke of Wycherley, "I could not. There is no better. I looked." The news of it ran through society faster than fire through dry gorse, and the very drawing-rooms that had prepared themselves to pity the jilted Miss Dunmore found that they must instead court the future Duchess of Wycherley. Lady Vexley herself sent round a note of warmest congratulation that did not so much as hint she had ever thought ill of anyone. Philippa read it and set it aside without bitterness, for they had taught her, between them, exactly what she was worth in their counting-house, and then the Duke had crossed a crowded room and shown her their arithmetic was wrong, and she found she had no anger left to waste on people whose sums she no longer believed. The Duke looked at her for a long moment, and whatever he had esteemed in her for 2 silent seasons deepened, in that instant, into something he knew he would not recover from. "Marry me soon," he said. "I find I have wasted quite enough time already." They were married 6 weeks later, at the old grey church on the edge of his estate at Wycherley, where his people had been christened and buried for 300 years. He would not have a great London wedding. He said, no audience of the curious, only those who wished them well. But word of a duke's wedding cannot be kept, and the road outside the church filled with the very set that had laughed behind their fans, come now to gawk, to claim afterward that they had been there, to measure the bride and find, to their disappointment, that there was nothing left in her to wound. For Philippa came up the aisle in a gown of ivory silk and old lace that had been the Duke's mother's, and there was no trace of the jilted girl in her at all. She came to him serene, and he stood at the altar waiting with an expression that startled everyone who had ever called him cold, for the brooding Duke of Wycherley was watching his bride approach with his whole heart playing upon his face, as though he could not quite believe his fortune and did not intend to question it. There had been, in the 6 weeks between, one further reckoning. Hartwell had come to call at Wycherley, uninvited, his fine new fortune already curdling about him, and asked, with a wretched attempt at his old charm, whether his grace and he might let bygones lie, seeing as they should now move in the same circles. The Duke had received him standing, and had not asked him to sit. "We shall not move in the same circles," Alban had said in a voice without heat that was somehow worse than any rage. "My wife will choose our company, and she has had quite enough of yours. You did me no wrong, Mr. Hartwell. You did her a very great one, and that is hers to forgive, not mine. But forgiveness is not the same as welcome. Good day." And he had had him shown out, and that was the last word the Duke of Wycherley ever wasted upon the man. Edmund Hartwell was among the gawkers at the back, for he had married his Heiress in haste and discovered, as Philippa had foretold, that £40,000 was indeed colder company than a true heart. He had come, perhaps, to feel superior, to remind himself that he had escaped a poor match. Instead, he stood at the rear of a duke's church and watched the woman he had thrown away become a duchess, and he understood at last exactly the size of the thing he had let fall. The Duke saw him, of course he saw him. Alban saw everything, but he did not waste so much as a glance of triumph on the man, for to triumph over Hartwell would have been to grant that Hartwell still mattered, and the Duke of Wycherley had decided that he did not. He had eyes only for Philippa. He took her hand at the altar and slid onto her finger the heavy gold signet ring of his house, for the proper ring would come, but he wanted his name and his protection upon her first, plain for all the watching world to see, and he said his vows in a voice that carried to the farthest pew, clear and unashamed, so that not one soul in that church could pretend afterward to any doubt of how he prized her. "With this ring," he said, "I do thee wed, and with it I tell every soul in this place, be they friend or be they idle gossip come to stare, that this lady was never less than she is now. They saw a portion and a fashion. I saw her. I have only the regret that I did not claim her sooner." The candle flames stirred along the altar. The old lace caught the light. Philippa Dunmore, who had been given away in a ballroom as a thing too poor to keep, looked up at the man who had crossed a crowded floor to keep her, and found she had nothing left to fear in all the world. Afterward, when the church had emptied, the Duke and his Duchess walked alone in the long gallery of Wycherley, where the portraits of 3 centuries looked down. "There is a space here," he said, stopping before a bare panel between 2 ancestors, "where my mother always meant a portrait of the next Duchess to hang. I should like them to paint you laughing, not solemn, as they always paint duchesses. Laughing, as you have not yet learned to do here, but as you will." "You are very sure I shall laugh," she said. "I am very sure," said the Duke of Wycherley, "that I mean to spend the rest of my life making certain of it." He raised her hand, the one that wore his ring, and pressed his lips to it, slowly, gravely, as he had done everything that mattered. "You were thrown away, my love, before all the world. So I shall keep you before all the world every day of my life, until they forget you were ever anything but cherished. But I shall always remember that I was the man fortunate enough to be standing near when a fool let go of the best of everything, and that I did not make his mistake twice." And he never did.